Today from Havana is at Vedado neighborhood, specifically at the National Center of Sexual Education, CENESEX, a very important place because it's a gathering spot for people fighting against the discrimination of women and much more. Today we will meet its head, Dr. Mariela Castro, very well known because she's the daughter of the president of Cuba, Raúl Castro, but she's more than that. And today we will find out why. She recently finished her PhD about gender identity conflicts. She has become a leader of the gay, transsexual, bisexual, and lesbian community in Cuba. Her mother fought in the guerrilla, which victory led to the revolution triumph. Then, she dedicated her entire life to fight for the recognition of the women's rights. Now, Mariela has expanded this fight to other discriminated groups. She's considered to be too honest in some issues, and we brought them here to know her opinions. Mariela, I want to thank you for this opportunity of having us here.
You're welcome.
And I want to start with something that a lot of people don't know about. What's the purpose of the National Center of Sexual Education, which is a very important place here in Cuba, and probably outside our audience don't know CENESEX?
The National Center of Sexual Education was created on the initiative of the Federation of Cuban Women in 1972. At first, it was a national sexual education group, and in 1989, it turned into a center of the Ministry of Public Health. The primary objective of this center is to create a national sexual education program. To create it, but also to keep on updating and developing it, and to offer consultancy for the implementation of the program through the central state administration agencies and civil society organizations. But since it was created, this group that later turned into this institution, it has been a coordinated center for educational and sexual health policies in our country, aiming to pass the emancipating spirit of this new society we are trying to experience and develop, mainly on the basis of the socialist emancipated paradigm, and providing people with the criteria necessary to realize how many elements related to sexuality and their life as women or men or transgenders have been manipulated and used to exert social control and even to dominate and exploit people. These are cultural messages and critically inherited. So we favor reflection about the history of all these processes, of all these meanings, which are still determining factors in our lives, and which we sometimes reproduce inadvertently. And what we actually want is to bring them to light, analyze them critically, and present new ways of dealing with, interpreting, and making policy on sexuality and identity-related matters. I think it's very interesting, Mariela, and one of the things that I believe is more outstanding about this center is the fact that it has been in the spotlight of our society for a few years now. And there's a thing that people in the streets say, that the fight for gaining the gender equality between women and men in Cuba, that's a fight that is not over, even though the Women Federation of Cuba has worked for that since the beginnings of the revolution. And sometimes people think that the debate is going to the sexual orientation more than the women equality, the rights of the women. I want to know your opinion about this. In fact, when we approach sexual education as a tool of human beings' emancipation, We have to take into account all issues that have been dependent on power and then gender. In other words, we have to take into account women's historical condition and how the struggles and contributions of feminism and social sciences in general have provided us with methodologies and arguments to understand what has happened, how this power relation was shaped by a male perspective, by male dominance, and by its highly stereotyped paradigm of women, and how from the moment humanity started talking clearly about human rights, all that can be interpreted as a historical violation of women's human rights. In other words, sexual education is not only a matter of saying use a condom and avoid AIDS, of how to use contraceptive methods to avoid unwanted teenage pregnancy or unwanted pregnancies at other stages of life. When people don't have the necessary conditions to be parents, it is not a matter of talking of pregnancy termination as women's right to take decisions on their own body. It is so much more. It is a matter of talking of how all of this was historically shaped by imposed power relations, that all of this is a result of ideological models we don't want to reproduce now. However, when it comes to these sort of issues, they are indeed reproduced. So sexual education is a matter of helping people realize there are many situations related to sexuality, orientation, gender, and self-identification according to those patterns and others that might not even be described, legitimized, or established, as in the case of many transgender people. So we cover all issues, but we also deal with the exercise of power through different types of violence, including sexual violence, gender violence, child molestation. We even launch public campaigns to highlight issues we consider important. At the beginning of September, we celebrate the World Sexual Health Day, and we devote our activities to children, teenagers, and young people. And in these activities, we highlight the importance of asking questions and learning, because the more people know, the freer and more responsible they are, and the less someone can manipulate them in their social relations. So the more they know, the more informed decisions they can make on their own. When people lack knowledge, they let themselves be guided by others. And in November, it's all year long, but especially in November, we deal with violence against women and all the factors that contribute to prevent and tackle this problem. On February the 14th, we'll launch a campaign which covers Mother's Day and Father's Day. It is about maternity and paternity with equal responsibility and rights. It started last year. And in May, we celebrate the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. We have to deal with all these issues because as long as this sort of discrimination remains, it is our duty and our responsibility to give our society scientific information so that our society can reflect on it, so that people can reflect on it.
So you don't think it's unbalanced? Sometimes people think that it's more shown what you do towards the sexual orientation and the fight against the discrimination of homosexual, lesbian, gays and all that. It's not unbalanced. You don't think that?
Well, at some point, when we started organizing the educational strategy and the public campaigns to promote respect for sexual orientation, gender identity, we started to celebrate that day in 2007, but in 2008, this celebration widened. It turned into Cuban celebrations of the International Day Against Homophobia. We did put a lot of effort on these activities. But we didn't quit other activities. But these actions gained more visibility and they began to upset a part of the population. And when something upsets you, you see it more clearly.
More controversial, más controversial.
Exactly. Contradictions came up, and there are people who feel really uncomfortable when we deal with these issues. So myths about our work are invented. It is said that we encourage homosexuality, which is impossible. You can do it if you want to, but it is impossible because societies have historically encouraged heteronormativity. But if it were that easy to change, people's sexual orientation, everyone would be heterosexual. And you see that even though they suffer and they are discriminated against, homosexuals and bisexuals remain so. Although they strive to become heterosexual, many people really strive they can't. Likewise, if we heterosexuals are demanded to become homosexuals, we can't. Because there are many reasons related to our identity, to the way we feel and experience eroticism, and who we experience it with. Then I think it is time to listen to. People shouldn't close their doors. We need people to open their doors and listen to us. We are not going to proselytize. We only want to talk, to listen to each other. All our work is based on dialogue, on listening, listening respectfully to others. And through our work, many people have learned to not discriminate. They have understood why they have done it and they have felt bad about it, but we always tell them there is always time to improve. There is always time for reconciliation. We tell them not to deprive themselves of that opportunity. And we are here to help, advise, be with, and support all people and institutions that are willing to take important steps toward this goal. I believe that as long as there are people suffering for these reasons, who are being discriminated against explicitly, evidently or not, no one can be a right, or at least no good person can be a right seeing that another person is suffering. And I think that motivates us to work and help mainly families. Family is essential to human beings. Feeling excluded within your own family is so painful that if you are not helped at the right time, you will be dragging deep, great suffering and many problems throughout your life.
I know you're working hard in this issue, and you are introducing this debate in our society, even in our National Assembly. And I know there's a draft, a project, an idea of changing or reforming or make an amendment to the Constitution in order to allow people from the same sex to get married. How's that going? What's going on? Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I think it's going to happen, but I don't know when. I don't hold out much hope that policies are under discussion. For instance, the Federation of Cuban Women has been promoting the revision of the family code for several years, for many years now. There are also new international commitments Cuba has made and international agreements it has entered into. Therefore, these should be included in our national legislation, and proposals are being made for the family code to include many elements favoring family rights, gender equality, equal opportunities for females and males, the democratization of relations between genders and between generations. These elements contribute to tackle abuse and violence within the family more effectively. And there is violence within the family when its members reject their children on sexual orientation or sexual identity grounds, and when families see that this family code, which is unbinding but embodies important values, brings in standards to help them approach that help them approach family relations democratically, respectfully. People feel safer under better guidance. People feel under better guidance when the law tells them not to hate their children, not to reject them, not to exclude them. Which, when it tells them to be with them, to take care of them, to ask for help if it is necessary, I think that parenting is a very difficult task, and it is useful to receive good professional advice and assistance. It could be psychological, psychiatric, educational. Professional advice and assistance is always very welcome because you don't have all the answers. And all contexts are difficult and complex. Each son, each daughter is an individual world to discover. And being the mother of one child doesn't bring you all the necessary experience to take care of all your children adequately and to favor their full development too.
Is there a debate, about the changing of the Constitution?
Among the people there is. Among the people, and thanks to our educational and communication work, there is dialogue. And it is even a written dialogue because we hold debates on the web, and over the year we create forums for discussion for people to express their opinions. There are some TV programs, radio programs, and we have seen that people are taking an interest in learning more about these issues. And of course, they are increasingly interested in expressing their opinions in favor or against what we say. I think there should be changes in some laws, not only in a particular law or in the Constitution. I think that the possibility of including these issues in the ongoing legislation changes would be very positive for our society. And even for our revolutionary project. It is not possible to talk about revolution, socialism, and human beings' emancipation if we keep on reproducing prejudices that stigmatize, make many people vulnerable, put them in difficult positions, and make them suffer. We are not starting from scratch. In the Cuban society, there is long-standing work related to rights and policies that favor women's, children's, teenagers, and young people's rights, including policies that favor comprehensive sexual education, which was approved as a state policy at the first Congress of the Cuban Communist Party. The point is that the implementation of this well-meaning policy entails many contradictions, but science contributes to implementation. Scientific knowledge is having an increasing influence on policy making. And that is also Senasex's role, to provide this kind of knowledge, to offer advice. Some friendly countries we have a close relation with serve as points of reference. It could be useful to take into account their experiences, and we recommend that we take them into account.
You are, Mariela, and I expect you don't take that in a disrespectful way. You're a very controversial woman. And for example, I know about an experience recently. You're a lawmaker, and you vote no recently in a decision about the labor code because you disagreed in a sexual orientation and discrimination issue that was in the law. Why did you do it? And a lot of people is wondering that. I want your own opinion.
It was indeed a bitter and painful experience for me because I did agree with the labor law, but I couldn't accept the inclusion of non-discrimination on sexual orientation grounds without the inclusion of gender identity. They are concepts science has provided us with. They result in people's rights. When one of these concepts is excluded, some people who need it are excluded too. All of this is essential for us to defend people whose gender identity is a cause of exclusion on their jobs. It has happened, and we have dealt with it as an institution. If legislation doesn't make this easier, everything is more complicated for us. For instance, when we lodge a complaint, we are asked what law recognizes it. And of course, we have to explain that it is part of the policies, that fighting against this discrimination is part of the first conference of the Communist Party. It is one of its objectives. As science and social practices provide us with information about certain concepts, these concepts should be included in the laws. Even though they change, even though they constitute evolving social constructs, there is no problem. But as long as they are clear enough, and as long as they are used as basic human rights principles at international level, we have to use them too. And that was it. I didn't have the opportunity to explain it in the assembly, and I could only make my initial proposal. I hope that eventually we'll get to discuss this further in the assembly. I believe that the assembly should be a forum for a meaningful dialogue, and at that time I couldn't give in. I couldn't abandon my convictions and betray what I have learned from the Cuban revolutionaries, what we have been taught, never abandoning our principles and convictions.
You've accomplished so much, Mariela. You just recently finished your PhD. You're the head of this center, which has done so much for our society. You've traveled with the message of Cuba. You're doing this in the National Assembly. You're making your own path, and with you, a lot of people that are working in this fight for gender equality and against discrimination. And there's a fact that I can't just not mention. There are people that say that that's possible because you are the daughter of the president of Cuba. And I don't think that's true, but I want to know your opinion.
I think that my only advantage is the possibility of talking to him every so often on Sundays.
He works a lot.
He does. Now I try not to bother him on Sundays, but I think that the only advantage, sometimes I don't have to undergo time-consuming administrative procedures to send him a message. Many times I write him letters which have been more effective for him to understand or pay closer attention to what I want to communicate. And of course, there are formal letters from me as the head of the institution to the President of the Republic, of first Secretary of the party. If it were really that easy for me, because I am his daughter, I would have already achieved all my goals. But I haven't. We haven't moved forward on many matters. And he has even told me, I'm sure you know that a long time ago your mom got me to understand many of the issues you address. But you have to defend your view. You have to defend it and convince people. Because I can't do it for you, I'm your dad, so it isn't right. You have to defend it. If I weren't your dad, I could support you, but I'm your dad, so I shouldn't. And I think that's the right way.
It's a disadvantage.
It's a disadvantage, but I respect his position. I'm striving, I'm working, and if it were that easy, all my proposals would have been accepted a long time ago. So we keep on our work, and I have the limitations and the advantages and disadvantages of all the institutions in our country. I could never ask him for special treatment because that would be disrespectful toward myself, and because in this work we should look for useful mechanisms for our society's inner functioning. And if I try to find the easy way out, I don't contribute to society at all. So I go through the proper channels and aim to do what I think is right, what the very Cuban society has told me is right.
We here in Cuba, we have this tendency of creating images, untouchable images of people we admire, like Raúl and Fidel. I want to know about the father, not the president, not the fighter. not the guerrillero or militante. I want to know about the father.
Well, really, my father is a dearly loved father. Since our childhood, we have really enjoyed spending family time with him. Both he and my mom favored family time. They made time for the family, they needed it. And that was always essential to us. Even today, it is important to be together, to talk about many things, to remember things together, and his memory is very good. So he tells many anecdotes, which is important mainly for the youngest members of the family, but he always brings in something new. When I look back in time, I see that, for instance, they had many hard times, sad times really, during the revolutionary fight. But my parents would always tell us about the good times, the fun moments. They would tell us fun anecdotes which were important for us kids. And those anecdotes instilled many valuable principles into us. Those anecdotes also included assessments on history, his love, his respect for his comrades, his obligations with respect to his comrades in arms who fell down in action, and he remarks on the fact that they would have been real assets, and also on his love for those who are still among us, on their efforts. And he remarks on the complex learning process of carrying out the revolution, of building socialism in practice, by trying to carry out the revolution with as much authenticity as possible and with freedom too, facing deep painful hostility though. The war in Angola was really painful. Losing young people because we have had to defend ourselves and defend other peoples has been a painful experience for families. And we have also lost a lot of comrades over the last few years. We have truly identified with the revolution, not only because of the history we know, but also because of our family experience. And can you imagine? Whenever he tells us an anecdote, there is something new. For instance, many times he has told us what happened after the assault on the Moncada barracks, where he ended up, how worried he was, because he wanted to know if Fidel was alive, if his friends were alive, how little by little he found out how they were tortured, how they died, how they were brutally killed. And really, sometimes I think he plucks up courage and tells us a little bit more. For instance, when he thought they would be executed, Montané used to tell him, Raulito, when they're about to execute us, we will sing the national anthem. And those are stories he tells with so much passion. And there is also a lot of passion in the stories about his beautiful experiences with my mom. I think they have left us a love legacy, and I'm very grateful for it. And he also talks about the stresses and strains of carrying out the revolution, about inner contradictions, inner difficulties, about the way to carry out the revolution more effectively. But he also talks about external contradictions, threats, really hard moments. And I sometimes say, well, I have had the good or bad luck to experience some things that were not communicated to the people, some moments of suffering shared by a very small group to avoid hurting others. And we would only come to know everything when we had achieved victory, when all the problems had been solved. So I remember that during the Cuito-Cuana Valley process, my dad wouldn't talk. He was under a lot of stress. He was suffering a lot, but not even my mom knew what was going on. And I didn't understand. I tell my mom, what's wrong with my dad? Doesn't he like me? Why doesn't he look at anyone and say hi? We are going through something difficult, but I don't know what it is. And all of a sudden there were celebrations to mark the victory, and I said, oh, that's why. There are many things. The sorrow whenever some comrade died in Angola. There are many things. And I think I have been very lucky to live at this time and to have a family that has been fully involved in it, or at least having parents and some uncles involved, relatives that have been involved, like many Cuban families that have been involved in such a difficult but fascinating revolutionary process. Sometimes I wonder how Cuba, the Cuban people that has undergone such difficult situations, including invasions and terrorist acts threatening the lives of their loved ones, has been able to live this process with joy, with creativity, with so much commitment. And my explanation is that there is deep social cohesion in the revolution's values, because its historical leaders have enjoyed the confidence of the people, because the people trust its project, because no one has manipulated us, and we are undertaking it very consciously with total freedom to make our own decisions. No one has forced us to stay here to carry out the revolution. We are all involved. And that is really one of the distinctive traits of this country, of these people, and it makes me proud of being Cuba. I'm proud of being so much involved in the revolution and in our time, to which moments to which we should make our modest contribution.
Mariela, let's dream a little bit. Imagine 30 years from now, the son or daughter of some of your, or your son or your daughter, ask you how he or she should think about Vilma and Raúl. How would you like them to think about them as your parents, but as the family? What's the words, the sentiments, the ideas that you would transmit to them?
The main idea I pass on, and I do pass on to my children, is that my parents started off as revolutionary young people. What I enjoyed the most is their history as revolutionaries who made a commitment to the people and a project of social justice. And they lived all their lives according to that commitment and that project. I think that's one of my favorite parts of my parents' history. And I think that's their greatest legacy to their family. And that's what I want to transmit to my children, and I want to do it with many stories and many anecdotes, and they also loved each other deeply. And they loved their family, but above all, they loved their homeland. And I think that a people that is able to uphold and hand down those values from generation to generation will always be a strong and free people.
Muchísimas gracias, Mariela. It's been a pleasure.